Hey there, welcome to Burnout to Thriving, the podcast where we toss perfection out the window and embrace the beautiful chaos of being a woman in a patriarchal world. I'm Cecilia Mannella, your therapist and coach, who's here to help you go from burnt out, stressed, and overwhelmed to empowered and thriving, all without pretending life isn't messy. Each week, we'll chat about the ups, the downs, the real moments of redefining success on your own terms. This is your permission slip to ditch the pressure of perfection. So grab your favorite drink, coffee, tea, water, or maybe a little bit of wine, and join me for honest conversations about what it really means to thrive in this real messy world. Are you ready? Let's do it. If I were to ask you to rate your stress level on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, where would you put yourself? Would it be a 6? Would it be a 5? Would it be a 9, a 10? Would it be a 1? If you're registering at a 1, you must be on a beach somewhere in Mexico, maybe, and taking in the sun while you listen to this, because I know very few people that would rate their stress at a level 1 in their day-to-day life. So if you're at a 1, congratulations. I'm really proud of you. And I hope you can share your secrets with me. Most likely, if you're listening to this podcast, Burnout to Thriving means that you're experiencing a little stress in your life. And you're probably going to rate yourself a little bit higher than a 5, most likely. And that can come from different places. It can come from relationships. It can come from work. It can come from entrepreneurship. It can come from, the demands of parenting. All these places stress can come from. So in today's episode, I want to help you maybe see stress a little bit differently, change your position and your perspective of it, and how to engage with it in a way that feels much more empowering to you and not feeling like you're kind of losing control of your life a little bit. But before we jump into what to do about it, we kind of need to spend some time understanding it first. I am a firm believer that you cannot change anything you don't understand. You can't change anything about yourself that you don't really understand, or you can't make adaptations until you really know what is going on. Knowledge is power for a reason. So sit back, grab your coffee, whatever you're drinking, and let's dive into stress. Our bodies are incredible. Now, I want you to know that I really do believe our brain, body, our entire organic setup, the way that we exist in the world is absolutely freaking brilliant. And in many ways, we haven't evolved that far from living in caves and hunter-gatherer and that time of our ancestors, which feels like so long ago, but in the reality of human history, really wasn't that long ago. And our reaction to stress is not that different than it was thousands of years ago. So we just don't evolve that quickly. As much as our world has evolved exponentially, especially in the last 100 years, our physiologically, the way our brain works, how our body works, actually hasn't really changed that much. So you can think about it as we are living in a caveman, cavewoman, body brain in a very modern world. And we're not really built to live in the kind of world that we're currently living in. So therefore, that's where stress comes from. The definition of stress is just something under pressure. And the word stress really came from the world of like building, in the sense like, steel under pressure or wood under pressure. How much stress can this actually take in the world of architecture and those kind of things? And then we transferred it into the world of mental health. And here we are talking about it all day long, every day, trying to come up with new strategies and new ways of dealing with things and whatnot. And so I want to first understand what's happening in your body before we talk about what to do about it. So your brain registers something as a threat. I mean, that's really what stress is. The brain registers something as a threat. Therefore, it feels like we're under pressure to make a decision, to do things, to survive, to navigate the world that we're in. And that it goes through certain processes around that. Now, when we lived in caves or we were hunter and gatherers, I think the threat was actually quite visible. Let's say it was a saber-toothed tiger or a bear or a lion or, the winter. It was tangible, something we could hold on to and see and there'd be a peak, there'd be a stressor, we would see it, we would know what's happening, knowing it would come to an endpoint, and then the stress would go away. That's kind of how it's meant to be. So I want you to visualize that, homeostasis, or where talk about being in a place of neutrality. There'd be a stress, there'd be a spike in that concern, that worry, that fear, and then it would spike up, and then it would hit a plateau, and then the stressor would be over and we'd come back down. And that's how we're meant to be. But we currently live in a world where there's no coming down. Oftentimes we live at that peak consistently, and that's where we spend a lot of our time, and that's not really healthy for you. But getting back to the brain stuff. So our brain will find a threat, okay? And then it will respond in a way to protect itself. And what that means is it kind of triggers this cascade of physiological reactions in order to deal with this threat. Now, if you were faced with a bear, there are certain things that would happen instantaneously without you thinking about it. What would happen is your body would go into what we like to refer to as a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. Now, if you want to know a bit more about fawn, it is more of a new thing that is especially related to women. And I will spend another episode actually talking about the fawn response. But what we go into is this survival response. It's this beautiful thing that happens in our mind. The switch gets flicked and something happens. And what it is that the body just goes into this very instantaneous reaction to protect itself to a threat. So there's a bear in front of you. What happens? What happens is your heart starts to pump a little faster because it's trying to move blood flow and oxygen flow to parts of the muscles, the really big muscles. So like your legs, your quads, your arms, your shoulders, around your stomach, kind of like trying to keep the core as oxygenated as possible. And it also decides to slow down in areas where it's actually not needed, like your feet and your hands, kind of the places where you won't be needed to run, let's say, or to fight back as much as possible. So you'll find that sometimes you'll get cold hands or cold feet, and then the rest of you feels really warm. What also happens is then your shoulders go up because our neck is one of our most vulnerable places in our body is our neck. So our shoulders go up to protect the neck. So we make that place really, really short. We kind of hunch in a little bit to protect like the center of our body. Our back gets really tight because it's protecting all of the organs that exist in there. Our eyesight gets very, very narrow because it needs to focus on the threat in front of you and not be distracted, but maybe the birds that are in the trees. If you encounter a bear, all the other stuff doesn't actually matter, right? So what it does, you just imagine if you encounter something, it's instantaneous reaction. Now, this isn't something that you think about, and I'm really grateful that we don't have to think about it because this is what's kept us alive, is this idea of responding to a threat in this kind of, way. In modern world, we're not encountering a lot of bears unless you are out backcountrying or this is what you do. Most of us are, in the office or commuting or dealing with relationships or parenting or dealing with conflict in relationships, but we're not encountering bears on a regular basis. So what our brain does is identifies these current stressors as a threat, and we react to them as if they're that threat. And our body responds to it just like a threat. So if you think about how you react to stress, I know that you have a go-to way, that your body has defaulted to something. Now, for me, it's my shoulders instantaneously get really tight and I get a lot of shoulder pain, upper back and shoulder pain. And that's because I just want to protect my neck, I guess, is what my body's decided. And then what happens is it radiates into a headache, most likely. My eyesight gets a little bit wonky. My heart rate's really high. And that's kind of how I respond to stress. Sometimes my lower back gets involved and wants to join the team, and my lower back starts to hurt. And that's when I really know I need to start paying attention to what the hell is happening in my life, because stress is basically on the scene. I'm having a really strong physiological reaction, and maybe my mind hasn't caught up to it. My psychological response hasn't actually caught up to actually what's happening. The body will always react first. And I want you to know that your body always reacts first. We've become so acclimatized to this high level of stress that we're not even like conscious of it, but our body sure as shit is aware of what's going on. So I want you to think about what happens to you. Well, is it a stomach ache? Is it sore back? Is it your shoulders? Is it your upper back, your lower back? Do you find that your hands get really cold, or your eyesight gets weird, or you get really bad headaches? That you're going to have a physiological response that's just going to be yours. Now, if that's new to you, I want you to tune into that to find out what it is. And why is this important? Because we can use these signs and symptoms, if you want to call them, as a trigger point to pay attention. Because again, our body reacts a lot quicker than our minds do. So this is a good way to tune in and to pay attention. It also goes into how to manage it differently. Because if you're using your body as a cue point, then you've got your greatest ally online already. If you're tuned into it, then you can use it to your advantage. Because some of the solutions that we see a lot out there are a lot about moving your body. And now that has a role, it has a place for sure. We need to move our body. So the number one way of addressing this to begin with is just to move. Now, this doesn't mean like going to the gym and exercising and all these things or weightlifting. It just means moving. It means walking. Walking is your friend. Walking is the number one way to reduce your cortisol levels. So your stress hormones is to bring it down. So walking makes a difference. What happens when you're walking is also you clear your mind. So this is walking without earbuds. This is like no music, no interruptions in your brain, just silent walking. Outside is preferred. Now, I know that if it's wintertime, maybe that's not an option. So maybe it has to be a treadmill. But trust me that when you do not have as much stimulus, beautiful things happen. When we're stressed and we add more stimulus, like listening to music or listening to things or talking to someone when we walk, it actually takes you like out of that restorative space of moving towards restoring back to neutral, back to homeostasis in your body, and it keeps you engaged in that stress. So we need a lot more silent time than we're actually getting. We are more stimulated than we've ever been. We have everything competing for our attention, and we need to kind of create a lot of silent space. Turn off the ringtone, put your phone on silent, and go for a 15-minute walk. Now, when it comes to stress and stress management, I rather shift the focus instead of management and thinking about reacting. So it's more about how to engage with stress in your life versus always reacting. And instead, we're going to respond. So we want to be much more proactive and we want to be much more aligned, and that we are feeling powerful in the way that we're responding. Okay. So this matters because if we do not choose how we're responding to a stressor, it actually has the ability to reactivate old trauma and old trauma stories. And it takes us out of autonomy and it takes us out of this powerful position. And it can bring us back into feeling really small, feeling little, or going back to old stories, old trauma stories. That can be trauma stories from a divorce. It can be go all the way back to childhood. It can be from your youth. It can be from your early 20s. But what happens is that when we don't choose how we respond to stress, our body will choose for us. And all of us have had an experience of some sort of trauma, and it will bring us back to that trauma and it can reinforce those old narratives. Let me break it down for you. So, let's say you went through a divorce, and there's a lot of grief attached to that. And as much as we love to think that the most amicable divorces are great, the truth is that even if you have the most amicable divorce, it's actually quite difficult. It's traumatizing. It's hurtful. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of loss. There are things that are said that cannot be taken back. There are wounds that have come out of that place because people in thriving relationships don't get divorced. And by the time you get to a place of divorce, there's been so many wounds, so many micro wounds and major wounds that there's just a lot of hurt there. And there's a lot of trauma that exists in that. So let's say that you've gone through a divorce and you're 3 years out and you're in a new relationship. And you love this new relationship and it's been really great. And you've met someone really amazing that's in your life and somebody who provides you with what you need. And you don't have to fight for attention as much. And you don't have to, hustle as hard as you did in your previous relationship. And there's a sense of feeling calm in this new relationship, which is amazing. And then what starts to happen is some of these old stressors start to come back and they start to pop up. And you have a really shit day at work, or you're working at a project that is really, really hard and really, really demanding. And your body starts to respond to this. It starts to get really tense. It starts to feel really uncomfortable. Then sleep starts to go off. Your ability to concentrate goes off. And then what starts to happen is that there doesn't seem to be a reason for this because we don't always see, let's say, the work project as the source. We don't see it as a bear. And then we look to our new relationship because our old relationship was a bear, but our current relationship isn't. And when the mind can't make sense of something that's happening, a physiological experience we're having, it looks for it. It wants to find a reason. It wants to find a why so it can solve the problem. Your brain is wired for survival. It's wired to find solutions to problems. So it starts to look around. And then what happens is that it can attach itself to the relationship and start to look for trauma stories. It starts to reactivate old trauma that can reinforce narratives of not being good enough, not being lovable, not being heard, a feeling invisible, or that you're not safe. And this is in the caveat of the current relationship being a really good thing. Now, the brain will look for it. So if we're not taking control in how we're responding to stress, the brain will find ways to create a story that sometimes reactivates old trauma and then reinforces those old narratives and those old stories, even if something's not happening. So what we want to do is we want to make a decision in times of calmness, hopefully, in the best case scenario, if not in the times of stress with a really great journal is how do you want to respond when your body's having this reaction, when your body gets tense and your heart rate's up and you're getting headaches and you're not sleeping and you're thinking too much about parenting, relationships, this project, this work, entrepreneurship, your business, all these things that are causing a lot of stress in your life and your body's responding to it. How do you want to respond to that stressor? And I don't want it to be like rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. It's a legitimately honest question. How do you want to respond? And I don't want a fairy tale answer. I want a realistic answer. And this might take a little time for you to connect with because we often want to go to what we see on Instagram or we see on social TikTok, or we go to the perfectionism piece of it. I'm going to do this life perfectly and I'm going to work out every single day and I'm going to do yoga and then I'm going to meditate and I'm going to journal, and we just like load more shit on our plate, inevitably making it more stressful. It's kind of ironic actually. Instead of sitting in a place of, how do I actually want to respond to this? Now, the cheat sheet around this is actually connecting it to your values. Now, if you've been tuned into this podcast, you know that I'm a really big fan about values, getting your values figured out and really tuning into what life is, with your values as a direction and how much better life gets. And so you tune into your values. So you have to stay aligned to them. And again, we can only hold about 3 to 5 values at a time. So you have to kind of narrow that down to 3 to 5 values. And when you think about your response to stress, which is an active choice, you are choosing to react in a very specific way because you've created this plan. You're doing it out of your value set. Okay. And then when you do that, it doesn't trigger or reactivate old trauma, and it doesn't reinforce any old trauma stories. Because what it is, it's rooted in the present and it's rooted in a place where you are powerful. It's rooted in a place from where you have full autonomy, where you're making decisions on how to respond to something. So you're not passively reacting to something, but you are in charge of the response you're having. Now, this might feel like a little bit of a shift and actually maybe a little bit of a micro shift, but it is in these micro shifts where life gets so much better. It isn't about the big overhaul that you have to do. It isn't about those things. Honestly, the 1% change can have radical changes in your life. It can be such an amazing place to connect with, and it feels much more achievable. So, if your stressors in your life are coming up, and I'll use myself for an example. Let's say I'm having a reaction and I need to tune into my values. And one of my biggest values is curiosity and creativity. So those two are really big in my life. And anyone who knows me personally knows that they're big things in the way that I live my life is being hyper curious. I'm always learning, and trying to be as creative as possible and expressing in different ways. Now, my creativity comes usually in writing, or in exploring and learning new things, or building things, graphic design, all those kind of things. So the first thing I do when I'm feeling that pressure in my body, my neck starts to hurt, is to just stop. I take a moment, I grab a journal, and I start writing, because that's my way. And in that, I'm curious and asking myself questions like, what's happening? What's going on? What is my body trying to tell me? What are my shoulders telling me? Because when you tune into conversing with yourself and your body, you'll find that there's a lot of information in there. What are my shoulders trying to tell me? What's my back trying to tell me? Maybe it's like I'm sitting too much. I'm hunched over too much. My body feels really rigid. I'm very stressed about hiring a new team member. And then I tune into that and write about that as much as I possibly can. Then I think about, okay, what are some creative ways? Like, how do I tune into creativity in a way that would create some space and some relief in my body? And sometimes that's drawing, sometimes that's writing, sometimes that's getting on to Canva and doing some little design things that I like to do. But I start to ask myself different questions on how I want to respond to it. So, in fact, I'm sitting back and I'm taking control of how I'm engaging with stress. I'm not upset about it. I don't should allure myself like I should be doing this better. I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or I don't should on myself as much as possible. And I'm not also rooted in perfection. You don't want to be rooted in perfectionism. You want to be in a space of just connecting to your values and being really, really curious, because the solution, the response that you can have is actually right there. You just need to tune into it a little bit. And you're going to find that when you sit in this place of responding to stress instead of reacting to stress, it actually decreases your stress to begin with. Like, you could rate yourself at a 9 out of 10, and you go to a place of asking yourself how you want to respond versus reacting to, and you'll find that your scale number will move from a 9 to an 8, because there's a shift that happens in that powerfulness. Because one of the biggest stressors is feeling powerless. When we feel like we don't have the ability to change the outcomes or influence what's happening, we feel really powerless. And that increases our experience of stress. Again, it's like the bear in front of you feeling really powerless, like you can't fight it. So that powerlessness feeling can trigger stress. Also, if you have old wounds and old trauma, powerlessness is a feeling that comes from out of old trauma. And this is how we kind of reactivate or reignite that old trauma story. So we want to make sure we don't feel that. We want to feel powerful in the face of stress. And when you shift into your values and get really curious and say, well, what will my values tell me about how to respond to the stress? One, there's always an answer that pops up, and you feel more powerful and more in charge. And this is how we engage with stress very differently, because you don't have to fight the bear. That's not a thing. Again, unless you're out in the wild and you're fighting bears. And if you are, that's pretty fucking amazing. But the truth is you're not. You're fighting stressors of everyday life. And those don't go away. Unlike the bear that comes and goes, these things, like all the stresses you're experiencing, are probably fairly consistent in your life. You can't get out of. You can't not work. You can't just bail out of being a parent. Like, you're not going to like leave your relationship in that sense because you're having some conflict. So we want to really spend time thinking about how you want to respond to stressors that are aligned to your values so that you feel powerful, you feel in control, and then you choose to respond. This isn't about getting rid of stress because, to be honest, I think we just live in really stressful times. And I'm not here to gaslight you to say that you are the problem because you're not. Your body's having an authentic reaction to something in your life, and you have to decide how you're going to respond to it. And this isn't about convincing you that things are not stressful because they are. And it's not about always changing the things that causes you stress because that sometimes is out of our control. But what's in our control is how we respond to it in a way that is aligned with our values and who we are. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into like journaling and figuring out how this works for you and how it can help you, I'll put a link in the show notes. And you can grab my 7 days of journaling at ceciliamannella.com/journaling for women. And in there, I'll run through 7 days of different things to journal about and give you some direction and some prompts. I even have a playlist for you that I do it on audio, so that can help you as well if you prefer audio versus written. And it will kind of walk you through different ways to journal and how to engage in it that will help you with responding to stress, to welcome more calm in your life and feeling confident and kind of connecting to that powerful, kick-ass woman that you actually are. Don't let stress take you away from that because you're amazing and the things you do are phenomenal. The fact that you juggle all these things, I know that you're juggling a million things and that you're doing it really freaking well and you make it look probably really easy. But I know that your body is screaming about the impact it's having on you. I just want you to tune into your body. I want you to listen to her. I want you to engage with her, and I want you to decide how you're going to respond. I hope you found this episode helpful. I really enjoy having this conversation with you, and I look forward to chatting with you again next week.